maybe once the dust has settled, Rangers fans will feel differently about today's manoeuvres. But for now, despite the reassurances from the administrators, many that we spoke to were angry, frustrated and fearful for the future of the club of whose 140-year history they've been so proud.
I'm joined now from Edinburgh for a second night by Stephen Morrow, an expert in football finance, and here in Glasgow, though not for a second night, by the Daily Record's Jim Traynor. Well, Jim Traynor, first of all, the big new thing we know today, isn't it, other than that Rangers are now in administration, is that actually the reason the taxman went to court this morning had nothing to do with this tribunal that everyone's been talking about for weeks and weeks. Yeah. It would appear on the face of it that Rangers have not been paying the tax or the VAT that they owe very recently over the past few months.
That's right. HMRC are saying that they're due £9 million or thereabouts through unpaid PAYE and VAT. Now, this has been spoken about for a long time, months in fact, that this may well be the case. But, you know, until now, it couldn't be written about, it couldn't be broadcast, but the taxman has now made it clear. And he's revealed that Rangers have not been paying their dues. And, you know, and that's why the taxman is concerned, and rightly so. I mean, it's almost inconceivable that you could be running a club of that size, a business of that size, so much in the public domain and not paying your taxes. I mean, it really is unforgivable. And I hope that Craig White was watching the clip there, and particularly those fans. If there's any humanity there, if there's a spark of understanding what this club means to these people, I don't think he'll sleep tonight. But somehow he probably, I imagine he probably will, because I don't think he fully understands just what he's done to so many people.
Well, Stephen Morrow, what should we read into the fact that the tax authorities went to court today rather than allowing Rangers to do what they said they wanted to do yesterday? What should we read into that?
Well, I think, in a sense, we read into the fact that there was other information that hadn't been put in the public domain. Yesterday, the information that Rangers put into the public domain was very much about the big tax case, the tribunal.
Not what we've just been talking about.
Absolutely, and I think this is very much an attempt by the HMRC to say, actually, there's much more to this story, and that there's at best obfuscation here. There may be other things going on too, and I think they were really sort of reclaiming part of the story and saying, wait a minute, we need to put some of this into the public domain because it is not currently there.
Right. I think, Stephen, that we have to focus here, and I think that's what the tax people were doing today. This nonsense that Craig White's talking about since yesterday about possibly £75 million tax bill with penalties, it's fantasy. It won't be more than 49. That's huge enough. But the chances are Rangers might not even have to pay that. It might be £12 million penalties, for instance. But this nonsense has been throwing about that it could be as much as £75 million. That's a red herring. Well, okay, that is a red herring.
There is a view that despite the very understandable upset and anger, as you were referring to there, of Rangers fans, that the current situation actually may be where Craig White would rather like to be.
I think you could look at it and you could make a very strong argument from day one to say this is where this was always going to end up, in administration. And I still think that liquidation is a very real threat to this club.
With the assets of the club coming out,
yes,
bought
absolutely.
by someone, perhaps Craig White,
that can happen,
and you have a new Rangers.
What's to stop one of Craig White's companies or someone else offering the administrator money for Ibrox, money for Murray Park, money for the Albion car park, and then renting it back to Rangers? The same can happen in liquidation. You don't have to deal with your shareholders now, especially if it's liquidation. And these assets could be sold off, because you heard the administrator say his priority is to look after the creditors. The main one is Craig White, so he has to look after him. Craig White was saying yesterday that this process could lead to a stronger, fitter, better Rangers. This could also very easily lead to a much weaker Rangers and a club after 140 years that is damaged beyond repair.
Well, let's explore in a moment, but I just want to stick on this point, Stephen Morrow, that in a way it may be in Craig White's interest for the club to go into liquidation. He buys out some of the assets. What I don't understand is if it is the case, as everyone keeps saying, that HMRC want to play hardball on this, not just on Rangers, but they want to get tough on what they see as tax avoidance by football clubs the length and breadth of Britain. If they allow Rangers to go into liquidation, how do they how are they seen to have got anything out of this? Because they would lose all the money, wouldn't they?
Yeah, I think there's two things about HMRC here. One of which is that there may be a political case they're trying to make here, that they are at least being seen to be tough on football clubs. But I think the other thing is that they are also concerned about the accumulation of further obligations to the tax authorities. So it's not just a case of trying to get money back, which is currently due. It's also this fact that, as the club is continuing to trade, more money is clearly becoming due to the authorities.
So what you mean is because it would appear Rangers have not been paying current tax, they want to intervene now just to stop that bill running any higher?
I think, and that's perfectly sensible. They've got an obligation to try to work in the public interest, and if they see a bill which is already potentially very, very high, if there's a tax case goes against the club, but they also know that they're not paying tax as we go along, then I think that's part of the reason why they've intervened. But I think there's also the political case that they know this is a very high-profile case, and they need to be seen to be acting in what is clearly in the public interest and the government's interest in terms of the Exchequer.
Sure, but if you were them, it is difficult to see an outcome from either administration or liquidation. It's easy to see in both cases how Craig White, it may be a weakened Rangers, as Jim Traynor suggests, but could still emerge as the owner of Rangers. It's difficult to see how HMRC emerges saying, look, we're there, we're the White Knight coming on behalf of the taxpayer, and we've got the taxpayers' money back.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I mean, I think the most likely outcome here is HMRC will get almost nothing for this, and I think that's going to be the case whether it was administration or whether it goes out of business altogether. It is in a position whereby we've got an organisation which is living beyond its means and doesn't have the funds available to meet these debts.
It's not beyond the realms of possibility either. I mean, if there's £9 million HMRC is due to them, where is that £9 million? Where is the £24.4 million ticketus money? The fans will be paying for this for the next 3 seasons. Where is all of that money? Now, if some of it is still there, Craig White could very easily say to the Inland Revenue, look, there's some money, can we settle the tax bill with that?
Yes, for the 9 million.
Actually, it might well be their own money that he's offering, because where is this £9 million? What's he done with it?
Yeah. Why do you suggest that should Craig White emerge? And we should make clear, presumably at this point, if it goes into liquidation or even administration, it would be open to someone else, perhaps with more money than sense, to step in and say, well, no, I'll outbid Craig White and take over the assets of Rangers because I love the club and I want to
Well, in administration, it is open to predators, other predators, but, it's an administration. Why would anyone take it, offer money to take it? Because the big tax bill is still looming. I mean, that would be folly. You can come out of administration, but there's no ruling on the big tax case, so you would have that. If you buy it now, you have that liability.
So in that sense, if someone else is going to come in, Stephen Morrow, the club would have to be in liquidation, is that right?
Or I think it's most likely to happen when it goes into liquidation, because I think at that point you've got a clearer picture of what it is you're actually buying. So I think that's a more likely outcome.
And it is a feasible outcome, isn't it? I mean, you might say it doesn't make sense from a financial point of view, but you could say that about all the people who've been taking over football clubs right across the UK, couldn't you?
Absolutely, and I think the one thing we can probably say with some certainty is that somebody will come along and buy or reform this club in some shape or form at the end of this process. I think it will not disappear, but it will be a markedly different organisation.
And you might not own your assets. The
well, I was going to ask you that, because you said about 3 or 4 minutes ago that you thought if this scenario comes to pass, whether it's Craig White or not, that owns the assets of what would be a new Rangers, that it might be a significantly weaker club than it has been historically for some considerable time. Why do you think that?
Well, I mean, if you have to rent, if you're weakened significantly through this process, whether it remains administration or becomes worse in its liquidation, if you're weakened to the extent that it will take you years to recover, but you don't own your assets, the Ibrox, Murray Park, or even the car park, you will have to rent those, and that will cost you money. So therefore you might not become strong enough again to compete, because you're always paying massive amounts in rent every year to someone else who owns the ground.
Right, so you could imagine a Rangers what are you suggesting, a kind of mid-table
I think
team
that's
for
the
a
worst.
while?
Yeah, I think the worst case scenario is that they emerge from this process or liquidation, and maybe 1 or 2 or all of their assets have been sold off. I'm not saying that's what Craig White is planning, but it's a possibility.
All right.
Someone else might buy them. And where would Rangers be then?
Well, Stephen Moore, obviously one big factor in that is players. I'm just intrigued by a sort of technical aspect of this. As I understand it, if the club is in administration or in liquidation, players could be sold off to get money to pay creditors. But if you're one of the Rangers players tonight, do Rangers have to honour your contract in administration? I understand in England there was some sort of test case about this, and it was ruled that the compensation in player contracts came ahead of secured creditors.
That's right. There are different rules south of the border than there are north of the border. There's a thing called the football creditors rule that exists in England, which protects all football debt. That doesn't apply in the same way in Scotland. There's still an expectation that the players' contracts will be honoured if it's at all possible. But that doesn't also, nevertheless, it still gives the administrator the opportunity to try and sell players if that is going to help to meet the obligations.
But do they have to honour the players' wages that are laid down in those contracts?
That is the starting point. That is the guidance they've given, is they're expected to honour those players' wages if that's possible. But of course, that then comes back to the extent to which that's feasible, given that we have an organisation which is not actually able to exist as it's currently structured.
All right, look, we'll have to leave it there. Look, thank you both very much indeed.